Hello and welcome to another Fantasy Premier League video. My name is Steve and today we're looking at some potential aggressive transfers for Game Week 7. Now I had been preparing this video over the last couple of days and was just waiting until the final European fixtures had been completed, but the very sad news across the evening here in New Zealand is that the Queen has passed yesterday. And as a result of that, there were already some plans in place from the powers that be in England, where they have already scheduled all comedy shows to be removed from TV during the morning period. All presenters are required to be wearing black, and they are in talks of postponing all sporting fixtures across the weekend, including the English Premier League, which obviously does impact the FPL. It's not great news, and I feel for you all out there, but let's just move on forward with the Premier League fixtures. What this means for us is if all the games are called off this weekend, it will just be as if your players were playing in a blank. So any hits that you have spent already this week will still count towards your total. You'll end up with a negative score across the weekend because none of your players will play or earn you any points. You'll just be on a -4 or -8 or however many points worth of hits that you did take. For those of you who have waited until the end of the week to make your transfers to see what was happening in the midweek fixtures, you should hold even further and way up until tomorrow's deadline to find out what kind of announcement will be coming out in terms of if the games are going forward or not. The news broke while Arsenal were already playing their fixture yesterday, but just before the Manchester United game there was a minute's silence held, and so there is still the potential that something like that may happen across the weekend due to the nature of the heavy fixture schedule leading up until the World Cup. I'm not sure which way this is going to go, and so you just have to hold fire on any transfers and wait until we hear more. But from this point forward, we'll just assume that all games are going ahead for this weekend. And so my aggressive transfers that I was lining up are in relation to a strategy known as dead ending your team. And this is a strategy that you can play when you know that there is a deadline for when your team will be refreshed, either through a wildcard or this year, Game Week 16, every single team will get unlimited transfers during the World Cup, which is another team refresh. They have not termed it a wildcard, and that's just because that means in Game Week 17 you are allowed to use other chips, like potentially the bench boost. So my wildcard is slated or is locked in for Game Week 9. I am definitely wildcarding in Game Week 9. I went into the reasons for that on the deadline video, which I will put in a link in the description to below. It should be floating around somewhere on your screens. But that allows me Game Week 7 and Game Week 8 to make some pretty aggressive transfers because the players that I am bringing in do not have a long horizon in my team. They are only here for 2 game weeks for this week if I transfer them in, and next week would only be for the solo game week. But it does allow me to choose from a larger player pool, which have some immediate good fixtures, but you may not want to hold longer term. Now, my team's up on screen. I'll read it out really quickly for those of you that are on audio. I have Raya and Net, Trent, Cancelo, Cucurella, and Rico Henry from Brentford in the defence. I have Pascal Gross, Martinelli, Salah, and Luis Diaz in the midfield. I have Haaland up front with Jesus alongside him. And on the bench I have Ward, Andreas in spot 1 playing Chelsea, Perisic in spot 2 playing Man City, and Archer in spot 3. Now, my aggressive transfers are looking at how Liverpool are playing and the fact that they have so many key assets that are injured or coming back from injury in the centre of the park that it is actually detrimenting all of the attack and the results for Liverpool. Now, Manchester United have faced this particular issue with not having a quality CDM for a long time, and also a centre-back that was not performing to the abilities that we require in the Premier League. And Liverpool are seeing exactly what happens when those two key positions are not being played by your first choice players. Now, the lads that are filling in at Liverpool at the moment are working hard. They are looking the business. They are pushing the ball and working it wide. But the key things that are not happening in the midfield are the following. They are definitely not doing the defensive work and slowing down any sort of counter-attack against Liverpool. Now, this may be okay for one or two periods in the game, but when it consistently happens across the 90 minutes, it means that the whole unit as a whole doesn't get as far forward. They actually sit quite a lot further back because they are always there's no slowdown in this counter. Now, if you watch the game against Napoli, and you watch them get the ball in defence and the way that they transition the ball into attack, their midfielders are literally walking through midfield with one or two passes, easy passes, no pressure, no slowdown whatsoever, and they just work the ball into attack well too easily. This is something that we've seen quite a bit in the last few weeks. But also on the flip side, when Liverpool actually do have the ball, the speed at which the ball transitions through midfield when it is needed. Now, obviously, we don't need speed of transition all the time, but when it is actually needed, this ball is not being moved through midfield quick enough, and so the attack, or the number of opportunities that is falling to the strikers, and the wide men and Salah and Luis Diaz is just not there. Now, Salah is actually not as clinical a finisher as other players in the Premier League. Like, if you look at the likes of Son or Kane last year, they would be a lot more technically gifted finishers. Give them a couple of Jamie Vardy as well. Give them a couple of chances and they will sink them. Whereas Salah relies on volume of shots, and that is not the volume in which he is getting at the moment, and so therefore he is not converting as frequently as he was last year. And so with all that being considered, Thiago is on his way back. He did play, I think, 20 to 30 minutes in the Champions League, and Liverpool did look a lot better when he came on the pitch. However, he will still be working through to match fitness, and over the next couple of game weeks against Wolves, who are a very tricky opponent, and then Chelsea the following week. For the 2 weeks that I'm looking at, I don't think Liverpool are actually worth holding on to for these 2 weeks, and I can actually wildcard them back in game week 9 if I want to. Now, for me, that means I'm looking at getting rid of Salah and Luis Diaz. Now, huge transfers out, I know, and that would also be for a hit. But if we look at what Wolves did when they transferred to Spurs in game week 2 or 3 of the season, they will play exactly the same game plan as they did against Spurs, which they will against Liverpool, and that is they will hold onto the ball in defence. They will not play on the counter, but instead they will literally walk the ball up the pitch ever so slowly and frustrate the hell out of their opposition. This worked an absolute treat against Spurs earlier in the season, to the point at which Spurs got so frustrated when they finally got the ball back in the later stages of the match. They were so frustrated that they were forcing passes and giving the ball away all too easily, and Wolves just dominated the possession and the match from start to finish. I think this is going to happen again. Liverpool may have a little bit more ball than Tottenham did, but they will not have nearly the amount of opportunities that they are used to, and therefore I do not see Salah and Diaz doing particularly well in this match. Also, Luis Diaz has played 90 minutes every single week, and he is due a rest. Whether or not that comes this week is anyone's guess, but Jota did come on for Salah in the Champions League fixture at the weekend against Napoli for 30 odd minutes, I believe, and that indicates to me Jota is ready to start a match. The reason Salah came off, I think, is because Salah is being saved to start against Wolves. At that point when Jota came on, the game was dead and done. Liverpool were not getting back into the match. They were just all over the show and already too far behind. And so I think it was more saving the legs of Salah to sub him off and get Jota some minutes, getting him up to a bit of match fitness. And so I think it'll be Salah, Nunez, and probably Jota starting this weekend. Although Diaz may start, Jota may also sub in for him at some point. And for the next two fixtures, we are getting rid. And so if all the fixtures are going ahead this weekend, my tentative transfer plan is as follows. Now I'll just bring up fpl.team. This is my team from game week 6. And so the way I'm going to line up for the start of game week 7 is something like this, where I'm actually going to sell Salah, bring in Rashford, who plays Crystal Palace away and then Leeds at home next week before I wildcard, and also to bring in the new man Anthony. Now the reason that I'm looking at Rashford and Anthony for Diaz and Salah is mostly that Leeds fixture next week, but also Crystal Palace have been conceding a bucket load of chances across the first 6 game weeks, and with the speed at which Manchester United are looking to attack with, I think Rashford and Anthony could absolutely demolish Crystal Palace and at Leeds. I think Leeds will score a few goals against us potentially next week, and so it's going to be a goal-heavy match in which I think the attackers are going to do quite well. The reason I'm choosing Anthony is I watched the way he took his goal last week. It was beautiful. Then the way that he celebrated, he is there to work for Ten Hag and for the United badge. Even the way that he actually forced his way out of Ajax just shows how much he wants to play for Manchester United, and so he will be buzzing about and shooting at every opportunity that he gets, and I am well willing to jump on him early as a really big differential, especially across these next 2 fixtures. Now what this also allows is if I take a hit this week, it gives me the next 2 weeks for these 2 players to repay that 4-point hit. Now, so what I'm basically saying here is Rashford and Anthony are going to outscore Salah and Luis Diaz this game week and next game week for the 2 by more than 4 points. Now that's without captaincy. I was not going to I've got a captaincy video coming out shortly. I'm not actually considering Salah for the captaincy for all the reasons that I've just discussed and why I'm actually selling Salah, so why I'm not captaining him this week. But also it does allow all these funds to come into my team for the following game week, which is game week 8, which is the last game week where my team will play before I wildcard. And it gives me 7.5 million in the bank. Now the fixture against the fixture between Brighton and Crystal Palace next week has been postponed already. That is due to some sort of train strike over in England. And so Pascal Gross in my team, who was actually only here until game week 8, he was going to leave on my game week 9 wildcard anyway, actually does need to leave a week earlier. But what we do have is 7.5 million in the bank, and Spurs are playing Leicester next week, and so he is actually a really easy transfer up to Son for 1 game week. We would put Cucurella on the bench. We would hope like hell that Perisic is not rotated and does also start against Leicester, and we would have a team looking like this on screen. Now for game week 8, I'll just read this out. Still got Raya in net, but he's playing Arsenal at home. I then have to choose between playing Trent away to Chelsea, or Cucurella at home to Liverpool, or Henry against Arsenal at home as my other defender option. Cancelo against Wolves and Perisic against Leicester at home, which could be a great fixture for Perisic if he starts. We play Andreas against Nottingham Forest, which is a great fixture. Anyone playing Nottingham Forest can start in my team because Nottingham Forest have about the worst defensive stats in the league. We then get Son as a 1-week punt at home to Leicester, who will be very lowly owned. We have Martinelli against Brentford away. We have Rashford at home to Leeds and Anthony at home to Leeds as well. So those 2 boys have a great fixture to back up the hit that I took in this current game week. We have Haaland away to Wolves and Jesus away to Brentford as my final team running into my wild card for game week 9. Now that's pretty strong team. It is quite differential. That weekend, as I have mentioned, Liverpool are playing Chelsea, and so Salah and Diaz would both have horrible fixtures in this game week, and so spending the hit a game week forward allows these lads 2 weeks to pay back that 4-point hit. It also puts all the funds into my account for an easy upgrade of Pascal Gross, who does not have a fixture next week, to anyone that I want. Now, I'm not saying it's definitely going to be Son, because Son has not looked amazing or like the Son that we know of times past, but he is showing some of the signs of old, and Leicester would be an absolute stunning fixture for him to completely turn it around at Spurs. Those are my super aggressive transfers that are penciled in at the moment. We are just waiting for further news as to what is going on with Premier League fixtures, and that is what I will be doing if all fixtures go ahead. Now that is the video for today, so if you did make it this far through the video, please do consider giving it a like. Also hit that big red subscribe button if you want to be notified about more content coming your way soon, and until next time, I will catch you again shortly. Cheers.